Welcome to this second webinar on Rural Climate Dialogues, Local Approaches to Climate Preparedness and Resilience. I'm Anna Clausen at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and we are co-hosting this webinar with the Jefferson Center. Conventional thinking is that climate change is too politically charged to discuss in rural America. But with the completion of the second Rural Climate Dialogue in Minnesota, we continue to shed light on the reality that beyond climate policy, rural communities, whose livelihoods are closely linked to the natural resource base through jobs in forestry, agriculture, and tourism, are already being affected by climate change. They need a plan and a strong voice at the table. It's in all our interest. Rural Climate Dialogues can bring in new voices, and they can depoliticize the conversation around climate change in rural America, having the strong potential to influence policy and lead to sustainable systems change. Today, we will be sharing more about the Rural Climate Dialogue process, what it is, and hearing firsthand from jury members from Grand Rapids and experts how the second Climate Dialogue played out in their community this past May. Today, we are joined by some great folks who can share their personal experience. And first, we'll hear from Kyle Bozenko. Kyle is the Executive Director at the Jefferson Center and was principally responsible for the design and facilitation of the dialogue process. Then we'll hear firsthand from two of the 18 Itasca County residents who participated on the jury in May, Caleb, Tamila, and Lacey Daigle. Julie Kennedy, Grand Rapids City Engineer, who engaged as an expert panelist during the jury, will also be with us to share her perspective on the experience. And while we won't hear from them in person, I do hope to capture what the Grand Rapids High School social studies teacher and agricultural teacher led as they engaged high school students in a mini climate dialogue process in the months leading up to the community jury. Before we begin, I'd just like to say a couple of words about how the webinar works. At any point during the webinar, you can go to the drop-down box at the right side of your screen and type in questions. We'll be taking questions all throughout the webinar, and after the presentations and the discussion from our guests, we will answer those questions and field them to the appropriate speaker. Also, after the webinar is over, we will be sending everyone a link of the recording, and it will be accessible on our website. Just to begin, I wanted to briefly talk about the purpose of the Rural Climate Dialogue. The purpose of the Rural Climate Dialogues are to develop and amplify an informed voice of the people so that regional, state, and national policymakers can take their needs into account when developing climate policy. We are striving to build this rural support for the national climate change policies and actions by really expanding the range of rural citizens who are willing to consider the impact and the necessary responses to climate change. But to answer this question more deeply is to probably address why we're focusing on rural. So the rural resistance is real, and despite the urgency for action, U.S. climate policy is stalled, and rural constituents are among the most politically significant sources of opposition. And that may be because most of the climate policies suggested to date are not actually crafted to provide significant local benefit or to directly make these communities less vulnerable and more resilient in the face of extreme weather and climate change. Rather, they are proposed policies for climate mitigation through taxation that threatens to put further burden on communities who already spend a higher percentage of their income on transportation and energy. We at IETP believe that at the core of this resistance is a failed approach that intentionally separates climate policy from other community concerns. Second, rural is impacted differently. In general, rural citizens' views about climate are based on their economic and social realities, which differ in key ways from their urban counterparts, particularly around wages and energy costs. Rural residents earn less than urban residents on average, and they spend a higher percentage of their income, as I mentioned, on transportation and energy. But last, why rural? Because rural can really win big. We believe that this rural opposition to climate action is not immovable. Furthermore, rural communities have the highest potential to benefit from a shift away from fossil fuel energy and inputs. Whether it's renewable energy, reinvigorated local food economies, or more responsible land use, rural communities are where the production part of a carbon-friendly economy will happen, and where much of the benefit can be retained. At both the national and the international level, from a climate policy platform, they are structuring it for bottom-up solutions. Rural communities need to be the foundation to this framework, and they need to authentically be engaged. And we believe that done right, these new developments can help rural communities to not only survive, but be more resilient. And that is the key to both gaining needed U.S. rural support and to redevelop our economy in a way that will actually achieve, or perhaps even surpass, climate goals. That is, that climate policy needs to guarantee that the benefits and opportunities associated with this new economy are fairly available and fairly shared. That also means that climate goals need to be integrated into, rather than seen as overriding, to community sustainability and development goals. At this point, I'd love to hand the conversation over to our partner, Kyle Bozenko, to talk more about why we focus on using the citizens' jury process, and for him to explain this great model that they have developed. Kyle.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Bozenko, and I am the Executive Director of the Jefferson Center. And before I get into the details about the Rural Climate Dialogues process and what we did with Itasca County and Grand Rapids, I'll just give you as quick as possible an overview of our organization. Jefferson Center is a civic engagement public policy organization whose goal is really to get citizens involved in challenging public conversations and work with individuals to create opportunities to engage on these issues and to have strong conversations, develop their own solutions to a range of issues. And we are really happy to be involved in this process because the Rural Climate Dialogues is the outgrowth of a collaboration we've been with the Institute for Ag and Trade Policy since early 2013, when we sought out opportunities to connect with rural communities in order to bring voices to the table on climate conversations that we felt were really missing, both at the statewide and the national, as well as the local issue. And so when we began this process, we began thinking of how we could engage citizens and residents of rural communities. And what we came up with was through a series of conversations both with our original partners in Morris, Minnesota, as well as continuing that process in Grand Rapids, a multi-year commitment to our communities where we begin the process of doing organizing and outreach to build relationships in a community and identify potential areas where climate change and extreme weather impacts are manifesting themselves most directly. And so what that looks like is a series of individual and advisory group meetings to identify what those impacts might be, how to get community members involved, and what expertise is available in the community so that individuals can have these conversations and really focus in on the local manifestations and local impacts rather than looking more broadly at some of the kind of daunting and conceptual, bigger picture things. And then once we begin doing that, we convene a citizens jury, which is our trademark or hallmark or application of citizen deliberation at the Jefferson Center, where we bring back together a randomly selected group of community members. In the case of Grand Rapids and the Itasca Dialogue, it was 18 community members to come together and meet for multiple days to learn about, discuss, and create recommendations and solutions based on their experiences together. So in the case of Grand Rapids, we send out a random mailing to a large cross-section of Itasca County residents, and we supplemented that with digital and online invitations as well. And when individuals expressed interest, what we would do is have those individuals complete a random or an anonymous questionnaire, and we convene a panel of individuals from the community who come together, who are a demographic microcosm of the community. It's not perfectly representative in terms of demographics, but we try to make it as close as possible. And in this case, we had 18 individuals come together for 3 days to talk about how they're seeing climate change impact Grand Rapids and Itasca County, and as well as the region. For this experience, we invited a series of local experts, but we always, in all of our work, try to provide a common framework for analysis so that individuals who come to these conversations with a variety of experiences and perspectives have a common framework to approach these problems. And in this case, we worked with Mark Seeley, who is a Minnesota weather historian, to provide an overview of weather history as closely as possible specific to the Itasca County area, and provide some key concepts and terms so that individuals and everyone who was involved had a shared opportunity to talk about these issues together and a common frame and common starting point. We then worked with a variety of local experts, including forestry, fishing, and fisheries. We worked with individuals from Visit Grand Rapids, as well as the city engineer who's joining us today, and a number of others, all of whom were asked to come and just really talk about how they're seeing climate change and extreme weather as it's changed affect whether it's their profession or the way that they do their job or the way that they, in some cases, conduct their hobbies and their recreational activities over the course of recent years. And so these conversations framed the kind of basis for what participants in the climate dialogue worked with in order to identify the key challenges, the key opportunities, and the key recommendations for action, both on the individual level and the community level, that they thought everyone in the community should be aware of based on this information. And so one of the primary things that came out of this was a citizens report that the individuals provided and drafted together. And so one of the things that sets apart the rural climate dialogues and the citizens jury process is that we work with community members to come together and actually draft their shared priorities and recommendations together rather than respond to a series of surveys or respond to a series of votes. So in this case, there were a series of recommendations that emerged directly related to what the top challenges, opportunities, and recommendations that participants had for their community. And these were based largely on the information that they gathered and gleaned from the experts who came and how climate change and extreme weather are expressing themselves in their community. And so in terms of their primary concerns, basically what emerged was recognition that extreme temperature variation and severe flooding conditions are reducing or changing the life of capital assets and increasing kind of the challenges of day-to-day life, whether that's roads, whether that's water, any of those things. Another challenge was the lack of long-term planning or systems planning for management of both of natural resources in the area, recognizing that oftentimes the incentives are for short-term gains or short-term management rather than long-term. And then finally, a large recognition that stormwater runoff and increased stormwater runoff capacity and frequency is causing sediment and increased chemicals in waterways, which reduce water quality. Now, on the other side, the opportunities that emerged were in some ways linked to those, but oftentimes independent as well. So managing forests so that they're adaptable in the face of changing conditions. This is a perspective and an observation that emerged from the participants that as the climate is changing, forest management needs to change along with it to recognize that species may be shifting and that different temperature zones are occurring. The second primary opportunity that rose to the top was the fact that there's a lot of good information and a lot of powerful resources out there for individuals. They're oftentimes, however, really difficult to find and difficult to access, as well as sometimes difficult to find ways to use that proactively. And so opportunities of compiling and synthesizing all the information, whether it's government and from the city website to organizations and agencies that are out there, but trying to find ways to link that information so that people can take some of these steps. And finally, the last opportunity that emerged in the top three was accepting that some of these natural systems are changing and that changing natural management of these can happen both on the individual as well as the community level, and that by being aware of how these things are occurring, it provides opportunities for community members to take steps in their individual lives as well as take steps on the community level and find ways to turn that information and those resources into action, which is one of the goals of this event and the report that came out in the statement as well. And so one of the next pieces that we want to address was one of the things that emerged was a recognition that while the topic and challenges associated with climate change can be extremely daunting and big picture, that there are numerous individual actions that people can take, whether it's how they shop, how they live, what they do with their home, and how they plant the plants in their yards or garden, that individuals can take. And the participants were extremely supportive of recognizing all the different ways that people can make small changes that add up to significant actions to address climate change, both in terms of adapting to the realities as well as mitigating potential future changes as well. And so there were a number of things that people could do on their own property or at their own home, and things in their own lives, as well as just a recognition that the cumulative effect of many actions will add up. And finally, one of the main things was a sense of ensuring that individuals were able and recognizing that there were opportunities to be involved in public decision making, in how governments and agencies and other things make decisions, what information they're using, and a recognition that that was a key aspect of seeing some of these things happen on a larger community level, which is the next step about community actions that can happen, but a strong emphasis on getting people involved in public decision-making processes and identifying where and when those things can happen so that more community members are able to participate and bring these things to the attention of government leaders and other friends, peers, and colleagues. And so the final piece we want to touch on today was the top community actions that were identified. And these really come from a sense of what can be done within the local area, whether it's county or regional, given the circumstances, changes, and impacts that were presented by the experts and the solutions that were brought to the table as well. So one of the main things was really in terms of how to manage stormwater runoff and what can be done to ensure that as more and more extreme weather events and intense rain situations occur, that both communities and homeowners are prepared to handle those situations in terms of infrastructure, as well as the runoff and chemicals that may occur as a result as well. One of the other things that I'll link that was made pretty clear and talked about at length was the relationship between the natural resources and environment, the quality of life of Itasca residents, as well as the tourism industry that helps drive the economic engine of the area. And one of the things that was important for participants was to really to ensure that tourists are aware of what all the opportunities that emerge for people to come, regardless of how individual seasons may be disrupted or changed based on how weather happens at a particular given period of time. And finally, one of the things was important was improving infrastructure systems and being open to new design ideas and recognizing that there are ways to get some of those new technologies or different approaches into public decision making, which links back to the first individual action of really being holistic in thinking about how people are involved in addressing this issue on the individual level and connecting that to their community. And so at this point, I think we want to hand it over, and rather than hearing from me any further, hear from some participants who were members of the 18-person panel who met for 3 days as one of the experts who joined us to talk about her experience. So I want to pass over to Lacey Daigle and Caleb Tamala to talk about their experience as participants in the Itasca Climate Dialogue.
Thanks, Kyle. This is Anna again, and I think just wanted to say, let's just start with a question. Just to set the stage, Lacey, can you just describe what it was like to participate in this process with a diverse group of Itasca County community members?
Oh, it was very interesting. I learned a lot just about my community and what the concerns are in my community. And I don't know, it was just very informative.
And Caleb, do you want to add to that? Maybe, and since we've been participating in this, maybe you can sort of paint the picture of what it was like to show up on the first day, explain what different feelings you had by the time you completed the process, and anything else that helps others understand the process.
Well, I guess what I'd like to add to that is when we talk about the climate, it's always presented as a global issue, which it truly is, but it was nice to hear that there truly are some things that we personally can do at the local level so that, you know, we truly can have an impact and we can make a difference in our community. And from the first day to the last day, I mean, we took 18 people and we each definitely had our very personal opinions when we started. But by the end of the process, we were able to come together and we were able to focus on what we felt collectively were the three main issues. And it was really neat to see that process come together.
Thanks, Caleb. Thanks, Lacey. Speaking of the topics that were presented, do either of you want to maybe share what was either the most eye-opening or one of the most informative presentations you heard, and maybe overview a few of those?
I think the most interesting for me was the information we got on how our forests are changing and how the trees that are native to us right now are moving in another direction, and we're getting more trees in our forests that are from another part of the state because of the climate change. And I really, like Caleb talked about, that you only hear about it on a global level, and so to see evidence of something that's actually happening in my own area was eye-opening for me.
And probably what I appreciated most, and it was, I think it was probably Mark Seeley, because I think he was the one who talked about the climate and the rainfall and different aspects there, and how, you know, our average precipitation has steadily increased, but the timing of the precipitation has changed so that we're actually experiencing more dry periods. Even though we have more annual precipitation, we have more dry periods during the year. And it really amazed me that we can actually be in a drought and a flood at the same time. And, you know, and that just causes all kinds of problems. I mean, it causes problems for the farmers, it causes problems for the infrastructure. And that was truly an eye-opener for me, and it's something that we definitely have to plan for and adapt for on multiple levels.
Thanks, Caleb. Lacey. That's actually maybe a good segue for Julie, since you're sort of on the other end as the city engineer dealing with some of those decision makings. Julie, how did participating in the dialogue as an expert affect your understanding of how community members are feeling about climate change and extreme weather in the community?
I think the biggest thing is that there are a lot of varied opinions out there, and really understanding what the community thinks in our decision making. Quite often, you know, for instance, we've got design standards that have changed just in the last year. Things that we've done for 30 years, we are now doing differently. But what I've realized is in my own little world, I know why they're changing and why those design standards are changing. but to the public and to our elected officials often, it's just a mandatory rule change. And we don't really explain why. And so one of the things that I think I took away as well as that there are varied opinions, but I'm not so sure that the understanding always comes with those. And so I think we can do a better job as presenters and designers of explaining why these design standards have changed. And so hearing from the community members, not only in the 18 during the presentation, but the days prior to that, as I was letting people know that we were speaking and talking about this, that there isn't a lot of understanding or a lot of opinions and feelings that are backed up by data and understanding. And I think that's a fault of my own of not presenting that. So that was a good eye-opener for me.
Thanks, Julie. And I was going to say, not to put you on the spot, but to perhaps put you on the spot. We've had a couple conversations since the dialogue process happened just a couple months ago, and so it's been fairly recent. So to ask what you've seen happen in Itasca County in the community is perhaps more short-sighted. But what do you hope to see happen in the community as a result of this event? Acknowledging to those on the webinar that Julie was there for a portion of the 3 days. You saw a snippet of it. But are there ideas you have? Are there things that you think even after the event happened that have been bouncing around because of your participation in the community dialogue?
Yes, I think going into it, I realized education and awareness was a big one, and coming out of it, I realized even more so that the group identified that. What I think information is power is one of the words that they had used, or phrases. And we're trying, or hope to try to do the same here in that, for example, Boulevard Rain Gardens, something that we do as a city that is not often received by all residents as a good thing, and helping understand and educate as to why they may or may not be a good thing in a particular area requires a lot of interaction with the public. And so who can we utilize beyond limited city staff to do that? And so we're looking at pooling perhaps a program that we're trying to start is maybe the education and the knowledge of the master gardeners together with the labor and the youth of the 4-H and pulling them together to really promote the various aspects, in this case of stormwater or rain gardens and the boulevards in particular. And so, launching a program that is sustainable beyond just a single project and me talking to a particular neighborhood, this would be something that certainly on a city level, but hopefully also on a county level, could sustain itself as far as ongoing years and helping with that education and labor.
Thanks, Julie. Caleb and Lacey, perhaps the same question to you. I know, having been at the dialogues, it's a very intense 3 days, and you're surrounded in many cases by people you don't know or you're just meeting. After you left the community dialogue process, were there things that since then that have been on your mind, and what else would you want people to know about the project and the community process?
Well, I guess the one thing is I've spent a lot of time talking with coworkers and with friends and family. They asked what was going on during those 3 days. And I just really tried to stress to them is, because everybody said, the first response I got when I started talking about it is, well, there's nothing we can do. That's a global issue and it's in the hands of the governments. And until these different countries come together and they figure out what they're doing globally, there's nothing we can do. So just trying to educate people that, there are things we can do locally. There are things we can do to adapt. Kind of touching on what Lacey hit with the forests. There's lots of things we can do. We can't just sit back waiting for these world governments to all come together and get a grip on industry and carbon emissions and everything else. I mean, for the sake of our children and grandchildren, If our forests are changing, we need to start planting different trees today so that our children and grandchildren have forests to enjoy 20 years from now. And just having those conversations and trying to get the community to appreciate that there are things that we can do locally and we need to be proactive, not reactive.
Yeah,
Thanks, Caleb.
I agree with that. As far as, you know, talking to people, the first thing that they think is about the subject is, you know, about what's causing, you know, so-called global warming, you know, with the carbon emissions and things like that. But just to realize that, I mean, regardless of what is causing it, it is happening, and what are we going to do to cope with that? Or embrace it as far as that goes.
Thank you. Thanks, Lacey, Caleb, and Julie. I want to open it up and come back to some more time for questions, but I think this might be a good time to touch on what you've all mentioned in some way. I think Julie even talking about some plans for the future, ways to engage the youth, is that an important part of the dialogue process in both communities of which we worked has been to engage the high school students. And they were the high school teachers who worked with us, and the students were unable to join us today, and they wanted to be sure that that didn't reflect on how important this process was for them. So in Grand Rapids, in Itasca County, the dialogue process, for the months leading up to the community jury, we had what we consider a mini student jury process. And we worked with Sean Linder through the agriculture as the ag teacher in the high school, and Brielle Carlson as the high school social studies teacher. And the students actually had a panel of 9 local experts, an impressive panel of leaders from the community, a couple of which who also presented to the community jury in May. And more than 100+ students filled the auditorium, and for a couple of hours, I would even say they drilled these experts. And it was really astounding to see the youth and where they rallied and where they engaged on this topic. And in the process of doing this, it's very similar to setting up the process, as Lacey had mentioned, is to not debate why climate change is happening or who is the cause, what is the cause, but to talk about what's impacting, what are the impacts in the community, and to be some problem solvers and to solution seek. So when the experts presented, they actually did not share a formal presentation, but rather the students had worked for a couple days ahead of time crafting questions that they would ask these experts. And Brielle Carlson engaged 5 of her advanced geography classes and the students to really focus on that. And the Jefferson Center and ITP participated in providing training to the students on how to hold a citizens jury, which allows the students to hear an issue, discuss it and deliberate it, and then seek potential action. And the students researched who the speakers were and what their expertise was in. And the experts spoke on issues, everything from tourism to wildlife management, to fisheries. Experts included the president of the Chamber of Commerce, a premier leader in the timber industry, a local phenologist, just to name a few. So this discussion that Brielle Carlson worked on was entitled Woods, Water, and Workforce. And it was to address what are the current and future impacts of climate change in the Grand Rapids area. So the students hosted this discussion first. And then the students actually, 2 of the students, Maddie and Reed, 2 of the 9th grade social studies students, came and presented on the 2nd day of the jury to the jury members. And they shared some of their takeaways, some of their discussions that they had about focusing on what are we going to do about the changes to our timber industry? How are we going to deal with the fact that water quality is incredibly important to our livelihoods, whether it's through lakefront property and real estate, or through fisheries and other aspects of tourism as well. And so this is integral to the process that we've worked. I might even ask, open it back up to Caleb and Lacey to comment on what they thought about hearing from the students, and as Brielle said, you know, we have to hear from the students because they're our community's future, which was resonated with the jury members. But Caleb or Lacey, do you have any comments about how this resonated for you?
I think it was really interesting listening to them talk because it was really seeing a fresh perspective. I think they were more creative in their solutions than I think some of us older people are because they were just more open.
I was thoroughly impressed by how seriously they took it. Yeah, I guess sometimes I think we tend to stereotype the new generation, but I was thoroughly impressed by how seriously they took that assignment.
And I can echo that, having been in the high school classroom for 2 days with them. It was impressive. It was actually goosebump worthy when you started to see the students get very impassioned by it, and not because they came from a place of sensationalizing it. It was from a very true place of what matters for our family. How might this impact my parents' jobs? How might this impact the future ability for us to live and stay in this community and have the quality of life that we aspire to have? So that was that process, and we will send some links. We have some great student interviews. Again, we're sorry that our teachers and students couldn't be on this webinar to share their experience, but they have shared some of their very personal thoughts with us, and we'll connect you to some of those interviews. I think at this point, before we come back to some more questions from the audience, I might hand it back to Kyle to come and circle back, since this is the second dialogue that we've had in Minnesota, as to shed some light on how this compares to our first climate dialogue in Morris. Kyle.
Yes, great. So in terms of the direct comparisons, for in all intents and purposes, the actual format and process itself was as consistent as we could make it possible. However, one of the things that I want to refer back to is the topics that we covered in each event were really significantly different based on the economic, natural resource, and geographic areas that we were working with. So in Morris, the primary areas of interest that we worked with and identified with community members and leaders leading up, as well as how we worked with the students, was different. So it focused primarily on changes, climate change and extreme weather impacts on the local egg producing community, and talked about, as well as energy poverty as a primary area of concern as well. So where Grand Rapids focused on, as we talked about earlier, woods, water, and workforce, the Morris component was really focused on impacts on egg producers and how that might have ripple effects on the broader community in terms of economic development, community well-being, and long-term planning, as well as how that influenced water quality in the area. In terms of the actual processes themselves, one of the things that was different with what we worked with in Morris was that in that area, in that community, students at the high school, as part of the citizens jury process, actually went out and compiled nearly 300 household energy surveys from Stevens County. That data was processed and analyzed, and then created an energy poverty map of the area, which demonstrated which components of the community were at a higher or increased risk of having energy poverty, which is challenges and increased percentage of income being spent on energy usage, and that this actually became part of the presentation or part of the expertise that was presented and one of the perspectives presented to the community members. In Morris, there were 15 community members who participated for 3 days. In Itasca County, there were 18. And the biggest shift in, going back quickly to the students, was with, as outlined in Itasca County dialogue, these students themselves actually had a chance to come and present rather than just having their findings presented. And that was a great contribution to the conversation in terms of having the tone, as Caleb and Lacey mentioned, the students were very serious and they took this and ran with it and did an exceptional job presenting the issue professionally and expertly. And the tone in the room really shifted when those students came in and talked about all they had done, and the group really started working together following that conversation with the students when they realized and were kind of influenced by how much the students themselves had dedicated to that conversation. I think one of the other main differences that emerged from this before moving into the Q&A is really focusing on one of the things that Grand Rapids and Itasca County Dialogue participants honed in on and focused in on. What you have heard today is that there are a lot of really significant individual actions that they identified, and looking at the Itasca Climate Dialogue versus the Morris Area Dialogue reports side by side, Grand Rapids participants really honed in on individual actions and separated those out from community actions because there was a lot of insistence that people have a really direct route to finding how they can make an impact on this in their individual life really, really easily. And so that was one of the key differences in the actual reports side by side. Otherwise, the content and process was exceptionally similar.
Thanks, Pat.
Yep, go ahead.
I think at this point we are going to open up some questions, so please, we have some in the queue which I will get to in a moment. Please, if you recall from the beginning, use the drop down on the right side of your webinar to send us more questions. If you'll bear with me for a moment, I would just like to overview a bit of how this process fits into the larger national climate policy work that we have discussed earlier. And so I am going to just pull up a website, and this is also where I want to show you a lot of the resources that are available to find out more information about the process in Itasca County, as well as the Morris process and outcomes that were mentioned. First of all, I want to direct your attention to the website, the ruralclimatenetwork.org. And this is also referred to as the RCN. And so the Rural Climate Network, which is now in its third full year of operation, is an important vehicle for sharing the information and connecting dialogue participants from across the country and others who are finding that they're coming up with similar ideas of how their community would like to adapt or mitigate around climate change and extreme weather. So the basis for the RCN network is that it connects these rural communities with tools and ideas, partners for adapting to climate change and for mitigating, and it creates new ways of living and doing business in a changing environment. So members of this network share social and technical approaches to climate change between forestry and agriculture and other natural resource-dependent communities. In the network, if you explore through here, documents best practices and a lot of stories to facilitate a broad diffusion of these different lessons learned from across rural communities across the country. And I will also say that if you want to have access to more of a constant, more frequent feed of what is happening in these organizations, you can subscribe to the RCN newsletter here at the top right side of this screen. Then also from the pull-down menu at the top, you can find information about the Itasca County Dialogue. This is where you can find the full report created by the 18 community members over that 3-day jury. You can find hosts of information here up in this toggle, but I'm going to scroll down slowly, hopes to not make anyone dizzy. If you go down further, we have the reports and outcomes. And then there's blogs that actually will help walk you through what was presented, what was the process during those 3 days, and then more information about the student dialogue process, including, we'll have here added in the near future the interviews with teachers and students talking about that process. And if you care, there are full presentations from the experts who spoke. So please explore this. There's a lot of information there if you're looking for other information, and Morris Dialogue is also here and general information about the process. So with that, I want to minimize that and come back to this. And I think we will open it up for some questions. So perhaps, Kyle, I think I'll have you field the first question here in more detail.
Through discussion simulation, some facilitated dialogue along the way, as well as a series of large group and small group discussions, identifying priorities, separating out facts and other things. But basically, each day and each kind of session was really built around providing an opportunity for individuals to hear from experts on their issue area or topic area. The experts would present for about 20 to 25 minutes. We work with experts in advance to provide some consistency across presentations so that they were each presenting in a format that was consistent so that the information was easily accessible and to be worked with. And then there would be small groups, there'd be Q&A with the presenter, small group discussion, and identifying top takeaways from each session. And then there would be some group deliberation, both small group discussion and large group deliberation, identifying the facts and pieces that groups and individuals wanted to take with and carry forward as potential pieces of the final report that would ended up getting consolidated, revised, and edited for each component for opportunities, challenges, and actions. And so basically, the 3 days was spread out with a combination of informational sessions and experts, Q&A, small and large group discussion, and facilitated dialogue, as well as self-facilitation among participants. And then finally, the last day was spent a lot of time identifying priorities and finalizing the language and drafting the final statement. The participants themselves actually worked together to draft that document through a facilitated process where almost word for word, the executive statement and affiliated larger report were drafted.
Thanks, Kyle. Another question just fielded asking about future rural climate dialogues and if we are planning to host others, and if so, where. And I can answer that question. We are planning to host a third rural climate dialogue in Minnesota, in southeast Minnesota, dealing with, the southeast regional identity, which will be different from Morris and different from Grand Rapids, being based in a community that has much more focus on tourism and the river and natural resources, sand mining. There are issues that have popped up. And our goal, we had this large intent that real success looks like, for these dialogues, looks like being able to have these conversations across multiple communities and pulling this together so that climate policy is actually comprehensive of the needs of communities. So our goal is to pursue this in more communities. We're seeking partners and funding, and we also have a timeline of filtering this into the National Climate Policy Platform. And it is certainly does not need to be a Minnesota-based project. Part of the Rural Climate Network is to be working with other organizations across the country who engage on the ground authentically in their own communities and understand where those communities, where their concerns are coming from, what challenges they're facing. Kyle, anything you want to add to that?
In terms of looking ahead, no, I think that's a great overview. We're trying to expand and work with other communities, and are always open to finding new partnerships and building those relationships. So I think that's really one of our primary goals.
Great. I'm going to field a few more questions, but one thing that came up, Kyle, that correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we really covered well, some of the evaluation process that happens at the same time that the community jury is happening through the University of Minnesota. And if it's helpful, I can show a slide of what in Morris was a result of that.
Yes. So in addition to the having the pre-event relationship building, work with the students, and then the actual event and follow-up, one of the things that this our Rural Climate Program has is formal program evaluation conducted by researchers from the University of Minnesota, primarily to look at how well we do our jobs of staying neutral and unbiased during the proceedings, as well as to understand some of the shifts in attitude or perception that community members might have as a result of participating in these. And that can be anything from what they thought about climate change coming in to what they think about how they want to be involved in community life as a result of this experience. And so while we are still waiting on the updated data from the Grand Rapids event, one of the things we saw in Morris was individuals feeling as though there was a significant shift in how much they were aware of and understood climate change impacts and local extreme weather events as it related to their lives in Morris, and their perception of their own knowledge and efficacy on these issues was increased.
Thanks, Kath. If you see on your screen, not to be confused, this is evaluation from Morris. Just to reiterate that we don't have the Grand Rapids panelist evaluation back with us yet. And just to field some more questions, I know there was just a follow-up question about when the Southeast Minnesota Rural Climate Dialogue would take place, and that will be early in 2016, within our winter months of 2016, which means we are working and starting to work on that community engagement at this level, engaging with the high school students in the fall during their fall semester, and that's how that timeline looks. And Kyle, do you want to answer the question about, was it hard to find 18 people who could donate their days of lives to this process?
Right. So one of the things that I did not incorporate into my overview is part of our work. We compensate individuals once they recognize or indicate that they're willing and potentially available to participate. We provide compensation and daily stipends for participants. We provide transportation costs as necessary, as well as child care when appropriate or when it's needed in order to ensure that someone can participate. At the Jefferson Center, our work is really focused on reducing the barriers that people might have to participating in conversations about public issues or civic life, and we see those as really important elements of doing that to ensure that people who do want to participate have the opportunity to do so.
Thanks, Kyle. Fielding some more questions here. How many juror members did not believe that significant climate change was happening? You know, this might be a place, Kyle, if you want to talk about what you sort of saw as an overview, but maybe also Lacey or Caleb want to talk about just the general sentiment and feel from beginning to end about climate change.
Right, so this is Kyle, and I'll take that to start. And just to tie it into one of the other questions so we can hit one that was there was a question also about observers and at the event and participation from the general public. And so there were individuals in the group of participants who indicated that they were not entirely convinced or skeptical about climate change existence, but in many cases some of the questions came about not necessarily with the issue directly as much as how to find accurate and relevant information and data on what's really happening. I think that was the most direct place where those questions emerged. Were not as much of yes or no does it exist, but from my perception it was really about how do we find relevant and true information about what's really taking place. And before moving ahead and opening up for Lacey and Caleb, I want to just say the events were open to the public and we had observers there throughout the 3 days. And then after the event, Lacey and Caleb actually were both part of a panel of participants who we invited the broader community to participate in about an hour-long community conversation about this, and we had about 20 to 30 people show up for that event, and Lacey and Caleb took part in that as well. And that was a different component to this, just to have people look at the citizens, the climate dialogue report and provide their feedback and questions. And so that was another piece that we incorporated. And so with that, I really want to turn it over to Caleb, Lacey, and Julie to talk about what their experience was like working with their community members and neighbors on this, and then what they see as potential next steps.
Well, the one thing I'd like to mention is I know some people, and this was a couple of the people in our group of 18, but especially I noticed some of the ones that came after the 3-day session there. Some people don't like to use the phrase climate change, you know, for the political reasons or whatever the reasoning is. But everybody admits that for whatever aspect they've noticed, I mean, there's things that have changed in their world around them. So, I mean, things are changing, and whether they want to call it climate change or whatever they want to admit to call it because of their reasons, things have changed. And that was the one thing everyone was willing to agree to.
Thanks.
I just wanted to add a little bit that just how well the conversation was conducted, how well the dialogue was facilitated. The Jefferson Center did an excellent job moderating and keeping us focused on the topics and the issues and helping us gather our thoughts and putting them into a presentable format.
Thanks, Lacey. We're getting down to the final couple minutes, and I just want to make sure before I have a few closing comments that our guests have time for any final words. And maybe Caleb and Lacey, you can certainly add to those, but I'll start with Julie. Do you have any final words you want to leave us with?
I think just a thank you. This was a very good eye-opener for me. I love, I came from the private sector, now am government. As I hear that and I say those words, and I've said those years for decades of talking about it's global. We started in the beginning, a global issue, and it's the government. Well, that's me now. And so what I can do to help here as far as making sure that our elected officials are making informed decisions and making sure that we're getting that education and awareness out to the public, regardless of the word climate change or the facts, or I guess the opinions. We want to make sure that we're getting those facts and those reasons for design out there. So this was a good reminder for me and a very good eye-opener to how my friends, peers, colleagues view these types of changes that we're going through here in Itasca County. So thank you very much for including me in this.
Thank you, Julie. Caleb or Lacey, any final comments?
I just want to say thank you to the Jefferson Center for allowing me to be a part of it. It was truly an enjoyable experience, and I appreciate all the experts they had, and it was enlightening, and I hope that what we did is beneficial to the community.
Thanks, Caleb. Lacey? Yeah, just to add to that, that is just very informative and a very good experience, and yeah, if I had the opportunity, I would do it again.
Great. I want to conclude with just a few quick comments, and the one is just to reiterate this is being recorded, and all of you who are on this webinar, since we have your email addresses, we will send you a link to that recording as well as links to some of those resources that I pulled up online. And just to say, a lot of people ask us, and it's really good to be asked this and have this in the front of our mind, is what will success look like if we're conducting these rural climate dialogues? And for us, success is if community members can prove to themselves and others that they do not need to be the target of climate policy, and rather that they can be part of the solution in building these resilient, healthy communities. Success also means that we will build sound climate policy that is created not only to prioritize our greenhouse gas reductions, but also emphasize the local benefits and ownership opportunities through direct adaptation support that aligns with community development goals. Because we know sustainable system change will require a rural population that is empowered to be part of the climate solution, not just contributors to the problem. And the rural climate dialogues are not only help rural communities to think critically and plan strategically to address those challenges related to extreme weather, but it also allows them the opportunity for community members to embrace their role in the creation of good policies and sound on-the-ground solutions. So we thank you for being with us this afternoon, and we look forward to engaging with you more on this important topic of concern. Have a great afternoon, everyone.